If you go down to the woods today, be sure of a big surprise, because you'll never know what you'll find. When you walk through woodland during the autumn period, it can feel like a magical place, but you have to look really closely. I went through the woods recently and I found two things that I really wanted to add to my sketchbook. These things, if you weren't looking, you wouldn't really notice. I was looking for the bright red mushrooms with white spots that you often see in illustrations, but they were nowhere in sight. I did find other hidden gems though. These mushrooms were so tiny I almost missed them. It was the colour that stood out first. They were a very beautiful lilac colour. I believe they're known as amethyst deceivers. I know very little about mushroom identification, so I tend not to pick them or try and eat them. Some may be edible, but I don't take the risk. But I do like to draw them in my sketchbook. This next type of fungi I wasn't expecting at all, and in fact it's quite unusual looking. I think they're known as brackets, and they grow along tree trunks that have been chopped down. I didn't touch them or try and pick anything, but I did take photos to take back with me to use in a page in my sketchbook. Hi, I'm Diane, by the way, and I like to go out on walks and share what I see in my sketchbook.
Got mushroom inside.
If you do continue to watch this video, please ignore any of my terrible jokes. You're welcome to join me as I go through what I've found and how I'm going to lay out the page. But first, let's talk about the materials I'm going to use. And one of the things I'm going to use may surprise you, but more about that later. I prefer to work in mixed media, and when I'm not sure how I'm going to tackle a subject and want to change things up a bit, I switch to a different medium. Today I'm going to use marker pens, not only because they're fun, but they also bring me back to a time in my life when I was a child, when I loved drawing with marker pens. It brings back the feeling of playfulness that I used to have when drawing. The other medium I'm going to use is coloured pencils, and I'm going to use these at the final stage over the top of the marker pen. I'm also going to use a couple of fine liner pens for the fine detail. To add in highlights, I'm going to use a Posca water-based paint marker in white. And the secret ingredient is an office supply, otherwise known as correction fluid. Before I create the final sketch, I made some initial sketches to decide the layout of the final page. I created one sketch for the amethyst deceivers and another couple of layouts that showed the brackets. The final result looked similar to this, but I made some changes. I did my final sketch in my watercolour sketchbook. You will notice that there's a sketch on the left-hand page that I did a few weeks ago, and I need to consider this when I'm adding a sketch next to it. The layout needs to incorporate the previous sketch so it doesn't look too jarring. So the first line I draw is the horizon line that continues into the next page. The sketch that I did on the left-hand page was created using watercolours and coloured pencils. It will be interesting to see how the marker pens look next to it. Before starting with the marker pen, I did initial guidelines using a pencil. I looked at my initial sketches and created a composition that I thought would work on this page. I intended to have some text in the middle of the drawing and to have the brackets going down one side and the amethyst deceivers along the bottom. You can see here the outline in pencil that I've made as a guide. I'm sketching out the composition using the marker pens, and then I will be layering on top. You may think markers are easier than watercolours, and in some ways yes, but in other ways no. The same issue applies when layering them. Once a layer goes down, it's not that easy to go back and cover it up, and you can't remove that layer. So I like to layer them from light to dark. There is a way of adding highlights which I'll explain later. It's not a traditional art material, but it works really well. There is another point I want to make here about these non-traditional art materials. They are great fun to use, but it's good to be aware that they're not light fast. That means that eventually they will fade on the page. But if this doesn't particularly bother you, then that's fine. The advantage of using the marker pens is that there's no clean-up afterwards, and you can pick them up and put them down whenever you like, really. You don't have to prepare a space or clean up afterwards. The other thing I would say about them is that the ink tends to bleed through to the other side, and you need to protect the page at the back from the ink going through. I use a piece of acetate between the pages. When I bought the marker pens, there was also a sheet in there to help you with this. To provide more detail, I create an outline using these fine liner pens, and it's also a way of adding a deeper tonal value. I also use darker tones to add texture. I add in highlights by using this white Posca paint marker, but I did notice that when it dried, the white was less opaque than I wanted it to be. But I did find a solution to that, which I'll explain later. I switch back and forth between the white pen and the darker pens until I'm happy with the end result. As I'm finishing up this drawing, I just want to say something about the fungi themselves. I have this mushroom and toadstool identifier book, and I take photos and try and identify what I've seen when I get home. And I think these small purplish mushrooms are the amethyst deceiver. I love the names of some of these mushrooms. In the book it says the mushroom is whitish and tinged with purple. It doesn't have a smell. It does say it's edible, but I wouldn't want to risk this just in case I've misidentified it. And it grows among leaf litter, which is where I found it. I couldn't find any other mushroom in the book that looked vaguely like this, so I'm assuming I've got that right, but let me know if I haven't. The other fungi I came across is known as a bracket. In the book it says it's irregular, kidney-shaped or semicircular, usually seen growing in large, often overlapping tiers. The upper surface is rather velvety with concentric rings of different colours, including black, grey, purple, reddish-brown and white. This type of bracket is common and often abundant on dead wood, including stumps, twigs and branches of broadleaf trees. Its common name is a many-zoned polypore, and this is what makes them great to add in a sketchbook, because you can really enjoy drawing the pattern, adding texture, and there's lots of colours in there. The mushrooms are the star of the show in this drawing, so I've added a lot of detail to them and put them in the foreground. I wanted to keep the background very simple and also use very neutral colours that would recede into the background. I wanted to give the impression of trees so that you know I found these mushrooms in a wood. And in the middle I wanted to add some text. I like to include some text in my sketches and journals. I used a traditional ink pen to add some text in the middle, and it wasn't until I'd added the text I was able to finish the rest of the drawing, because I wanted the trees and a path to go around it and lead the eye into the picture. The final stage was to add in a path that went around the text, and I added a final layer of texture using the coloured pencils. When I was happy with the final drawing, I added my secret ingredient, and this is an office supply known as correction fluid. You can get these in a pen, so you can be quite precise where you add it, and I add it as the very top layer on a drawing using marker pen. It's very difficult to cover up once you've added it on, so I do this as the final stage. What I like about it is it's completely white and opaque and really adds a lot of contrast to the page. I keep adding more colour with the coloured pencil and more highlights until I'm happy and the page is finished. Here is the final result.